to everybody who has joined us today. My name is Jordan and I'm joined by Oscar and Jace, and we're from Otto IT, and today we'll be discussing cybersecurity and raising awareness around some of the risks that we're identifying and seeing in the industry and some of the threats, and looking at some statistics, how hackers are getting through, some best practices, and an opportunity for some Q&A. So just before we get started, a little bit about who is Otto. So we were founded in 2002, and since then we've gone through an evolution from being a few different IT partners and have merged into what is now known as Otto. And we are an IT partner that's people first, business focused, and our ambition is to ensure we're humanizing technology and focusing on the people behind the tech. Our head office is here in Melbourne, and we have some regional offices throughout the Western District. We've got clients all through regional Victoria and across the Eastern Seaboard and over to WA, and also across the APAC region. And like I mentioned earlier, my name's Jordan and I'm joined by Oscar and Jace today. So once again, thank you, and I hope you find this engaging. And if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A or chat box. We are streaming this across a few different platforms, so we will have the opportunity for further Q&A towards the end of the session as well. So to get started, we will hand over to Oscar. And Oscar, if you could please talk a bit about some of the statistics that we're seeing in the current threat landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jordan, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for jumping on the webinar today. So we've got a few stats up on the screen. I'll just quickly run you through them. The first one we've got here is 3,300. So since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's obviously been a couple of years now, we've seen over 3,300 new domain names containing the word Zoom that have been registered. Over 30% of those domain names have an email server attached to them, which is a pretty good indicator to us that those domain names and those email servers are being used to launch phishing attacks against people and businesses. Now, the next one on the screen, 11 seconds. It was predicted that in 2021, there was a ransomware attack every 11 seconds, and the global cost was estimated to be around $20 billion. And that's just for the single year. More on the ransomware here, 111,605. That's the average ransom payment that we're seeing now as part of a ransomware attack, which is 33% growth from the last quarter of 2019. So those price charges going up, and they will continue to grow as well. Now, before I explain the 18 million stat there, just want to let you know that we're seeing a second wave of COVID-19 themed cyber attacks. Originally it was all around the virus itself. This second wave is focusing more on the vaccine. Obviously it's a pretty hot topic, so attackers are aware of that and are using that to launch attacks at people and businesses, specifically targeted around the vaccine. Now, the final stat on the screen here, 18 million. This is a stat from Google claiming that they block 18 million COVID-19 related spam emails every day, or scam emails. And on top of that, there's another 240 million spam emails that are specifically related to the coronavirus. So pretty huge numbers, and that's a daily figure. This next one, I'm not going to read through all of these stats because there's quite a few, so I'll quickly run through it. The first one we've got here on the left, 300% increase in corporate credential phishing. So attacks, in the old days, and according to some movies that you'll watch, attacks were a person targeting a business or a server or a network. That's changing now. The attackers have realized that people are easier to target than infrastructure. So we're seeing, a huge increase in corporate phishing attacks. A phishing attack is essentially someone trying to trick you into clicking on a link, going to a web page and putting your username and password in. It'll be something that looks, like maybe Facebook or what we're seeing now is they're trying to recreate corporate systems. So it could be a fake, Microsoft login. It could be a fake Xero login, for example, where they're trying to steal these credentials. So the next one we've got here, 85% of organizations are exposed to targeted passwords attacks. So what that means is, 85% of businesses are being targeted in what we would call a brute force attack, which is where someone's just trying to use a machine to guess your password over and over again until it guesses the right password. And then they, have your username and password and they gain access to one of your business systems. And the final stat I'll read here is $26.2 billion worth of direct losses worldwide from June 2016 to July 2020. These direct losses are relating to email fraud and business interruption, loss of data, fines, all these direct losses around cyber attacks. I actually expect this price or the yearly losses to go up as we move forward as well. These target attacks become more common and kind of easier to deliver as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Oscar. Jace, could you please run through and discuss what the dark web looks like and how that might relate to some of those statistics we just heard from Oscar?
Yeah, definitely. Look, we've got a great diagram there on the screen showing us the difference between the surface web, the deep web, and the dark web. Now, starting from the top, the surface web is what you typically find on a search engine. So you do a Google search and you find a news article or a public Facebook page or anything really online that doesn't require much interaction, any login details. You can just search it in Google and it shows up. That's what you typically find on the surface web. The deep web is the next step. Now, it's still what's typically on the internet, and you are currently using the deep web. Most of you would be as it is, as your normal day-to-day work, because it's the stuff you find on the internet that's protected by some sort of authentication. So you're looking at your Dropbox, your OneDrive, your corporate documents that are stored on maybe your office server or your private cloud infrastructure that you're using. Anything there that's not typically found by a search engine, and you do need that extra set of credentials to get access to it. And then you've got the dark web. Now, the dark web is a subset of the internet that requires a specific browser to get access to. And that browser is called Tor. Now, Tor is just a redesigned version of Firefox that gives you access to this network. Now, what you can do on the dark web is primarily used to for people to remain really anonymous in certain countries and certain areas of the globe. To remain anonymous. Now, there's the other side of the dark web where people are using it for illegal activity, identity fraud, selling drugs. Because of that, the ability to remain anonymous really well, they can get away with a lot of things on the dark web. So it's a scary place and it's not easy to access, but a lot of people are using it to take advantage and send those phishing attacks that Oscar was talking about.
Thanks, Jace. As we move forward now, we'll look at how and what we're seeing in terms of how hackers are getting into your network and into your environment. And Jace, perhaps you could please cover and start off with interaction.
Yeah, interaction, it's a very popular attack. You can see there on the screen, we've got an email from Australia Post saying, dear, we've noticed a parcel was left for you, but we've got the wrong information. Please click on this link so we can correct our mistake. Now, what that's doing there, yeah, it gets you excited. You got a parcel. Everyone gets excited when they got a package for them, and you click on the link and you fill out the details because you need to update, so you make sure you get your package. What's happening here is it's tricked you. It's getting you to interact with the email, whether that be reply back to the email and give me your information, or click on this link and enter it on the website that I will send you to. Now, that website is typically going to look like Australia Post, but you'll find that it's not quite belonging to that to Australia Post, and we'll go through that a little bit later as well. Now, macros is an interesting one that's been around for quite some time. It is a part of the Microsoft Office suite, which was around and didn't have much security warnings in the past for ages, and they were being abused quite regularly. Now, what would happen here on the left, you can see an image of a protected document. You may be the recipient of this email and it would open a document and say, hey, this is protected, please double click here to unlock the contents. Now, by double clicking on that script, you may think you're going to unlock the protected document, but really what's going to happen is you'll get a, do you want to open this file? And it's something.vbe, typically a VBE script. Now, what can happen there just by double clicking and opening that macro? In the background, it's run a script within milliseconds, and it's got a remote access, a tool installed on your computer. It could ransomware your entire computer and all your network drives fairly quickly, or you might find nothing happens. And what we've seen in those circumstances is it waits until the middle of the night when no one's using their computer, and then it will initiate the ransomware attack. So you come in the next morning and it's a really, really bad day. So it was really commonly used. Now there's a lot more security warnings in place, but macros are still being used every day for these attacks.
Thanks, Jace. Oscar, can you please run through login?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the what I'll call the quintessential phishing attempt. It's an attack method where they're trying to impersonate a commonly used business account, such as your Microsoft account, and they're trying to trick you into clicking on a link and entering your username and password. So what they've done with this one is they're telling you that your password has expired. You need to click on this link to reset your password. They'll take you to a page that's going to look very similar to a Microsoft page. However, when you put your username and password into that, it's going to save your username and password in some form of database, which then they can do really whatever they want with it. Typically, they'll sell it on the dark web. Not often will they go and actively log into your account because they'll get so many credentials. But this is the standard, phishing attempt, and something to look out for. Really simply, firstly, look at the domain where it's coming from. They claim they're from Outlook, but if you look up at the top at their email address, it's msoutlook94@service.out100k.com. That's definitely not a Microsoft domain. So that's the first thing to look out for. And the second one is, you can copy or hover over the links they're trying to get you to click on to see where they're actually sending you. And you want to confirm that it's a legitimate Microsoft link. And I'd say the safest thing you can do if you get an email like this is, if it's obviously a phishing attempt, delete it. If you're not sure, ask your IT provider, someone like Otto IT, and we can help identify that for you.
Yeah, definitely. And just, we always say, send it through to us and we'll check it. And at least that way we can notify the rest of the organization as well if we're seeing that there's some targeted attacks coming through to the organization.
Yeah,
what about impersonation, Oscar?
Yeah, impersonation. This is a legitimate example that happened to Jordan a while back. It was not long after we'd announced our merge, DWM Solutions and Milan Industry merging to become Otto. So Jordan was posting a lot of content online, press releases, and had his name and email address attached to those articles. Milan is one of the directors of Otto IT, and he was also mentioned in the press releases. So this person, rselby8@gmail.com, decided to try and impersonate Milan, reach out to Jordan and say, are you free at the moment? And email me back, I need you to do something. So this is typically a first attempt where all they're trying to do is test you to see, do you know that I'm not actually the person I'm claiming to be? If Jordan was to respond and say, hey, Milan, what's going on? What do you need? Chances are they'd come back and say something like, I need you to pay this bill straight away. Or I need you to go buy some iTunes gift cards, for example. So yeah, the impersonation, it's an attack where someone's trying to impersonate a business owner, typically, or a manager. They're trying to find an unsuspecting staff member and get them to do something dodgy. Now, things to look out for in this kind of attack. Again, where is the email coming from? The name claims to be Milan. It's actually from rselby8@gmail. I can tell you we don't use Gmail, and we don't use something like rselby8 in our emails. The other things to look out for is, Milan, Jordan and I both know, and Jace too, Milan doesn't send emails from an iPad, typically. Milan sits about 3 meters away from Jordan in the office, so even emailing him to ask him to do something is outside of our standard process. So that is a trigger for Jordan to say, this might actually not be Milan emailing me. So things like that are really good things to look out for, and clearly documenting those processes so that if something outside of that process happens, it's a bit dodgy and you need to be careful what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk a bit about process breakdowns in a moment and share some real life examples of where we've seen that occur, and in a couple of slides shortly. Another big one that we're seeing at the moment is SMS scams. Jace, do you want to perhaps share a bit about, maybe slightly on what these examples up here are, but more so on what you're seeing and what we're seeing and the risks associated with that?
Yeah, I think almost everyone received a text message like this in some sort of fashion in the past 6 months. It was very popular to be sending these messages. Now, what a lot of people know is actually what this sort of attack is and what happens in the background. Now, this sort of attack is more targeted against your Android devices. The link there was, if you open that link, it would typically install an app from an untrusted publisher onto your Android device, and then start using that as a remote access tool, start understanding and key logging all of the keys that you type on your phone. And then there's a number of other data, location data, personal data that's stored on that phone that the hacker now has access to just from this link. So it was a great way for them to really easily just send one link, you click on it, and they got access to your phone. Now, what you'll notice in all of these text messages is that they're always have a spelling mistake, and they're always different. And this made it really hard for carriers such as Telstra and Optus to actually track it down and stop these messages. That's why they just kept happening and happening and happening, and no one ever did anything about it. No one ever stopped it because they couldn't. It wasn't the same text message, it wasn't the same link, and it wasn't the same sender. And what would typically happen for those who fell for this attack and clicked on the link, their phone and their mobile would be used in the next attack. So we're using the hackers, they're using legitimate phone numbers to send these messages to all of their contacts. So if you got one of these, that's a little bit of the background of what was going on there. And I hope you didn't click on it. But yeah, it was a really interesting attack for a solid 3 or 4 months that was happening for.
Yeah, I'm still receiving them.
There you go.
Today. I think a lot of people still are. So it's definitely a risk that it's so easy to fall victim to, because emails, obviously people become a lot more accustomed to what to look out for, but there's still a lot of people that aren't fully across the risks associated with these SMSs. And there's so many Android devices out there. It's scary, what the impact could be, not just the business, but just even individuals. So it's a good one to raise awareness on. This next scenario, I'd like to ask a question first, if I can. If anyone notices anything that sort of stands out in this photo, I'm not sure. We've got a few people on different platforms, so there'll be some questions coming in from different areas. But this slide here is, or this photo that's popped up. So one of our colleagues, Pete, was in Hawaii at the time, and he received this SMS or alert that popped up on his phone. And as you can see there, it says ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii, seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. Now, at the time, Peter was sitting he was in the bathroom, which some will say isn't the worst place to be if you received an alert like that. And he had no idea what to do. He didn't know whether it was legitimate or what. He went downstairs into the foyer, and there was hundreds of people running everywhere. It was just mayhem, and out on the street, it was not a lot. No one knew what was going on. Now, thankfully, soon after, he received another alert to say that wasn't accurate, and there was no ballistic missile threat inbound. So Pete was okay. However, what we identified was that this gentleman here was actually responsible, or indirectly responsible, for that alert being sent out. Now, if you notice, he looks very official. He's got his photo on his lanyard and name tag, and he's got a map of North Korea up on one of those screens, and there's all the security footage and so forth. But one of the things that you'll notice that pops up on his screen is a Post-it note. And on that Post-it note, he's got a password. And what had happened was, not too long before this occurred, he posted on his social media a photo of him looking really proud at work, which he deserved to be. It must have been a good job. And but he didn't realize that his password was there. And so whoever orchestrated this attack, which created a lot of chaos in Hawaii, identified what his password was and then didn't find it too difficult to access the rest of their system. So this is really relevant, where we still have ongoing, and it continues to be a long-term trend. The work from anywhere structures in a lot of organizations have implemented and will continue to implement. It's just really around that clean desk policy and how are you ensuring you're not showing passwords online and keeping your data and records safe. So yeah, that's an interesting one that I know at the time when it occurred, and not realizing Pete was over there, I'd heard about it on the news here as well. The next piece, before we get into some best practices, is the Notifiable Data Breach Act. Now, that's if you head over to the OAIC website, so the Office of Australian Information Commissioner, there's plenty of information on there, and we're able to send out information as well if you'd like. There's two numbers I thought I'd share, and the first one's 420,000. And what happens is if you get it wrong and you are breached and data is lost, and that data can impact your clients, there's a range of things that need to occur. And that could be potentially a civil penalty, an order of up to $420,000 on an individual, such as a director or a sole trader. And for organizations, it could be a fine of up to $2.1 million, and maybe other impacts and greater fines. And also things such as taking out advertisements in our national papers and publicly announcing those data breaches, which, yes, there's the fines that you may or may not be able to recover from, and hopefully you've got cyber insurance, but there's also that reputational damage and that risk to your brand. And if you did face an attack, what would that mean for the existing clients? And or if you're looking at obtaining new clients, which most businesses are, a quick Google would probably bring up some of those attacks and those breaches if it's been a serious attack. So we can definitely send some more information out on that and share some guides on how you can protect yourself in those scenarios. So in terms of best practices, and this is a piece that we typically really enjoy talking to clients about, not just in these forums, but generally in every forum, because it's a real life example of where we've seen businesses potentially get it wrong and then what they could have done differently. And it's just alarming at some of the things that happen. And when we look at cybersecurity, we look at three pillars. So we look at this people, process, and technology. And without one of those, it will fall down. And an example of where the people process or the people pillar has fallen down has been, there was a real estate office in the northern suburbs of Melbourne a few years ago, and there was an attack that occurred on a property manager there, and the property manager received an email, and they clicked on that email, and shortly after, their servers were infected with ransomware. And so they had a request to pay X amount of Bitcoin, which would have totaled a fair bit at the time, and they didn't want to pay it. So they called their IT company, who that wasn't us, and they said, "Well, can you reinstate our backups?" And the IT partner said, "Sorry, you don't have backups," or there was a problem with the backups because they were never tested. And what that meant for the business was the real impact was they had no way to reconcile their trust accounts. They couldn't pay out rental payments to landlords at that point in time. They didn't know what money had been received. So then they had to bring it, and all their data was corrupted. So they employed 3 staff full-time for a period of 2 months to start re-entering all that data. Now, we first learned about this through one of their landlords. So he came to us and said, "Does this sound like it's a legitimate claim that they've made that this has occurred?" And we said, "Yeah, it definitely could be." What we later then found out was through meeting an IT company that went in to clean it up and help them, was that not only did that attack occur, but the attackers then went and sent an email to their entire tenant database saying, "Hey, here are our new bank details. Please start paying your rental payments into this account." So they were not aware that that had occurred, obviously. And as a result, payments were starting to be made into a hacker's bank account. So then once they did have the details updated in their systems, they started calling their tenants and saying, "Hey, look, we noticed you're behind on some payments. Are you able to make those payments?" And it was at that point in time where they were alerted to the fact that, "No, but you've changed your bank details," when they hadn't really changed anything at all. So there was a simple people mistake and a lack of utilizing technology, and then a process breakdown as well caused a significant impact to that business, to landlords and to tenants. So That's, I guess, from our perspective, wanting to humanize technology, we don't just think about the tech, we're looking at what are the business risks that you may face. Oscar, perhaps you could share a more specific, another example around process.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I dive into that example, I wanted to talk about how process, it won't only protect you from attacks that are targeting your business. Something else that you need to consider that a lot of businesses don't consider is that other businesses being targeted and being breached can affect your business. And the example I'll tell you kind of explains that further. So we have a customer, and we went on site and we did a process building session with them for a day. And we looked at some of the processes in their business and said, how are they built? How are they structured? And are they going to protect you in the case of a breach? You know, are they foolproof in that sense? And one of the processes that we redesigned was invoice approval processing. So the process that we built said, person one that receives the invoice must get that invoice, look at the bank account details, and confirm against what's currently in the system. That then goes to person two. Once that information is confirmed, person two then also confirms the bank account details on the invoice against the one in the system. If all the details match up, then it's approved for payment. And what happened not long after we built this process is this company received an invoice, and person one looked at that invoice and forgot that step, forgot to confirm the bank account details against the ones in the system. They looked at the invoice and said, yep, this is a company we work with. This is an invoice we're expecting to see. That's all good. I'll send it through to person two. Person two also forgot to conduct that step of confirming the details on the invoice against what's in the system. Said, yep, this is a company we work with. This is an invoice that we're expecting to see. That's all good. And the invoice was around $100,000. So they sent off payment one, and a few weeks later received invoice number two from the company for the rest of the amount owing. Now, on the second attempt, person one looked at the invoice and said, okay, this is the bank account details on the invoice. They checked the ones in the system and found that they didn't match. So person one then sent it to person two. Person two was like, yep, you're right, it doesn't match. So they called the company that sent the invoice and said, hey, just wanted to confirm if you changed your bank account details, because we've got this invoice and the details don't match what we've got in the system. The company that sent them the invoice said, no, we haven't changed our bank account details. What are you talking about? And then they were able to show, actually you have, according to this invoice, your bank account details are changed. The company that sent the invoice then realized they'd been breached. Someone had logged in and changed the bank account details on all the invoices going out to their customers. And they'd been, that money had been getting sent into, again, a hacker's bank account. Now, obviously, the second time around, they followed the process and identified that and didn't pay the money. However, because they hadn't done that on the first time around, they'd sent, $50,000 to a hacker's bank account. I believe luckily they were able to get most of the money back. However, this is an example of a process where you're protecting yourself against other businesses that aren't necessarily as secure as you, and they're liable to be breached, but you feel the pain. You feel $50,000 worth of pain if you don't have a process like that set up to protect you.
Yeah, so that company did end up getting the money back. They did have cyber insurance, but it did take, I think it was over 12 months. So it was a long process. So yeah, I wouldn't want to be in that position.
Absolutely not.
Jace, what about from a technology perspective?
Yeah, technology is really important, just as it is for people and process. Now, you need the overall plan. You need the right processes in place. When technology comes into it, you can have all the best firewalls, all the best antivirus, all the best networking equipment and the computers in your environment. But what we find that the best or most secure method, and if you would implement one thing out of everything available to you, what would that be? We would be recommending multi-factor authentication. Now, typically your banks, most social media platforms like your LinkedIn, your Facebook, they all offer it. They don't enforce it. Most of your banks do. Most of the other platforms just offer it as an additional offering, but they don't enforce you setting it up. Now, multi-factor authentication is three things. It's something you know, it's something you have, and something you are. Something you know is that password to log in for the first time. You need to know that password so you can log in. Something you have is typically that multi-factor authentication code that typically sits on your phone. So on the Google Authenticator or Authy or Microsoft Authenticator, you open the app and you get that 6-digit code that expires every 30 seconds. And then something you are is biometrics to log into your phone. So using your Face ID or your fingerprint to access your phone and access that app to get the code, and then you can enter that in the website. So those three items, there's something you are, something you have, and something you know, are key to ensuring security on that account, because no hacker typically will have all those three things with them.
Thanks, Jace. And so when we look at education, that's obviously something that's pretty important to us here at Otto. Can you talk through what are some of the things that we do?
We do quite a bit here in regards to education, because we do think that is one of the most important things, to train your staff and to make everyone aware to double check those emails. Now, what we do as part of that is we send fake phishing emails to your entire organization targeting the brands that you would typically work with. And what we can do with that data, and we send a phishing campaign out for your staff, and maybe 3% of your staff click on the link, and 2% of the staff actually submit details. What we can do, we don't actually get those details, but we can provide a report saying these 2% of your staff are the most susceptible to this attack, and these are the ones we need to focus on your training on. So that sort of training is what we find the most successful, because we always get someone who falls for it, and then we can always provide training for that specific person. So that's one of the great ones. Other ones is password education. It's actually understanding what the industry standards are for passwords now. They used to always be 8 characters in uppercase or lowercase. You couldn't never remember it. It was random. You couldn't figure out if it was an L or an I. It was awful. And it's changed to phrases. So they're longer passwords. They're 12 or 14 characters, but they're words. And it's much easier to remember. It's easier to type, and it's harder for a hacker to crack. So we go through more of that password education and using a password manager to help you securely store those passwords, because ideally you shouldn't know any of your passwords. If you ask me, I wouldn't know any passwords except the one password that gets me into my password vault. Training compliance courses as well, security awareness training. We provide and send out those security training courses on identifying malware, identifying a phishing email, and the key things to look out for when comparing a legitimate website, such as ANZ Bank's legitimate website, and then their phishing login page targeting ANZ. And we put 2 side by side and get you to really look at the difference between those images and those login pages.
Perfect. Thanks, Jace. Well, that's the end of the webinar and what we had to present. So more than happy to answer any questions that you might have, and even if it's a question that you might not feel comfortable asking in this environment, more than happy to catch up for a call and run through that personally with you as well, and answer any other questions that you might have. We've got one here that's come through, Jace. Oh, here we go. Is WeChat a security risk?
Look, that's a great question. WeChat, it's a bit, it's a hot topic, and it's similar to these topics about WhatsApp, for example, and other chat platforms. All those chat platforms, Signal, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, WeChat, they're all built in their own way. They all say they are encrypted in some fashion, most of them anyway, Facebook with the exception. But what does that encryption actually look like? Signal, for example, is what's referred to as open source. So all its code is available on the internet for the public to assess and review and say, yes, it's secure, not just some company saying that it's secure. It's actually publicly verified. WeChat is another one which I'm not too familiar with. I have heard the skepticism of the platform, that it's, again, it may say it's encrypted, but it's just some company saying it's encrypted, and it's heavily monitored by third parties. So I won't be able to give you an exact answer on that, but understanding, is the code publicly available? Can anyone review it? And can anyone verify, general public verify that when they say it's encrypted, is it actually encrypted? And those are the key things that I typically look out for.
Yeah, definitely. And another question received here is, all my data and emails are in the cloud. I shouldn't need, do I need antivirus and backups?
Look, backups are really important. If you've got data sitting in Dropbox or OneDrive or SharePoint, that data is just another hard drive in someone else's data center in Microsoft or Dropbox data center. And it can still be encrypted. It can still be infected with malware and ransomware. And we've seen it happen before. We've seen data that's not backed up and not protected in SharePoint. Just have ransomware go through it, just like a normal hard drive. It's no different for them. Now, Microsoft's not too concerned with what you do in your SharePoint or in your OneDrive, and similar with Dropbox and Google Drive. It's not their responsibility to back it up. It's not their responsibility to keep it secure. It's your responsibility. So making sure the data is backed up is key. If your data in those platforms are secure, definitely have them backed up, and then keep that antivirus on your computer, because it'll protect that access into the cloud platforms such as Dropbox.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also important, how your backups tested, and how quickly can you recover those backups? Some businesses have a lot of data stored, and, what would the cost of that downtime look like? And the other thing that we see is that it's often perceived that the risk could come from a hacker or some sort of attack from an external threat, but also we overlook at times the internal threats, and that could be a disgruntled employee that is potentially resigning or has resigned or has done something wrong and trying to cover some of the marks they've left, and going through and deleting a whole lot of files and records. And we've seen that in the past. And thankfully our clients have those backups, so we can reinstate and restore that data. And but if they didn't have those backups, they'd be in a bit of trouble. And what Microsoft and Google do is they have what's called a shared liability scheme. So if their data center was to burn down or flood or something happened, that's their fault, they'll have backups. However, they're not backing you up in any other scenario. So please do review what you have in place, and make sure you've got something in. It's one of the most inexpensive sort of measures you can take in terms of backing up your cloud. Got another question here.
Just going to add to that, sorry, before the next question, Jordan, is as business systems change, as we move from on-premise file servers to cloud, there's always this game of cat and mouse between cyber attackers and the security companies. As we move more cloud, the hackers will move their attacks to cloud because they know more and more people are using them. So while they might be safe in the first instance, that becomes less and less secure as the hackers figure out how to attack them differently. So your typical last line of defense, your backups, antivirus, that kind of thing, it's always going to be important because there's always different attacks coming out that will do different things. But in the end, if you've got a backup from 4 hours ago, from before you got hit by that virus, that's the safest option. That's the last line of defense and something you need to have no matter kind of what systems are in place.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Oscar. Jace, another question that's come through is it difficult to set up email? Can you see that question? Email/services that do not deliver an email to the user?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something we do for most of our clients that come on board with us, is setting up that cloud email anti-spam filter, which sits in front of your email server that checks every email as it comes in and uses AI to assess, is it malicious? Does it have links to sites that are known to be malicious? Does it have macros in it? Is the email impersonating someone in the organization? So for example, in our organization, we've got Milan Rajkovic, and if someone sent an email in that's pretending to be Milan, it would see that, we actually know Milan's email to be this, not this Gmail email. I'm going to raise this as suspicious, or maybe send it to junk or quarantine it completely. So there's definitely possible. It's something we do all the time, and I'd highly recommend it.
Yeah, great question. Thank you for asking that.
Yeah, I think just to add to that as well is there's the chance of blocking 100% of those emails, no matter what systems you put in, are really low. Like there is always going to be one that slips through. It's next to impossible to completely eliminate them. And that's where the education piece comes in, is, you can put those systems in place, but if one gets through and people don't know what to look for and click on that link, the 10,000 before that got blocked don't matter, because the one that got through did what it was trying to, and you've lost that credential.
Yeah. and it could be anyone in the organization. We see people in all different roles that regularly impacted. Do we have any other questions from anybody else? Again, feel free to, I'll pop my email in the chat box here as well. Feel free to reach out. We'll send you a follow-up email, ideally with a copy of this recording. And if you've got any questions, more than happy to have a phone call or an online meeting, whatever it might be, to answer any of those questions or anything else that you may want to cover. But again, thank you for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate you doing that. We understand just how busy it is at this time of the year, and thank you for taking that time today.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you to Jace and Oscar as well for joining. It's much appreciated.
Happy to be here.